Greetings, I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome back to the TGT News. While we congratulate all scholarship winners and those leaving their immediate school systems, we go in depth on the issues surrounding the safe return of our nation's children and educators to the physical environment with Education Minister Dr. Nyan Gadsby-Dolly. Welcome, Minister. Thank you for making the time. And even before I pose the first question, I just want to manage expectations, saying this is not the conversation where we say, okay, by Wednesday, this is going to happen, just to make sure we're on the same page. But in terms of asking where did we start with the return of students to school and then work our way up towards getting there for the third term test?
Hi, Dike. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. In February of 2021, that would have been the first phase of return of students to school. At that time, we had our examination students out, those of secondary school level. So we had forms 4 to 6, they were out, and they were completing SBAs and so on as they went into the CXC exams of 2021. Come October 2021, we again had students come out to school. At that time, it was the vaccinated students of forms 4 to 6, early October 2021. Just a bit, about 2-3 weeks after that, we had the return of all students of forms 4 to 6. And that again was the end of October 2021. So since then, we've had students out in this way. When we came to January of 2022, we had our students coming out, forms 4 to 6, and then in February, we would have asked the forms 1 to 3 to come out, as well as the standard 5 on a rotation. And that rotation, of course, was required because of social distancing concerns. So that's the progression of how we have been bringing students out from 2021 up until the present time.
And with that though, and you spoke of exams, so SEA, CAPE, CSEC in a pandemic, successes, challenges, lessons, what are some of those considerations that you're bringing to the table as we move forward?
You know, Dike, examinations have all been physical. So SEA of 2020, CXC exams of 2020, SCA of 2021, CXC 2021, both January and June, and most recently January 2022. All these exams have been physical exams, and we've had thousands of students turning out to be able to do these examinations. And of course, this is of priority because it speaks to the ability of our students to progress along their education system. What we have seen over the past time, of course, the learning loss associated with students being away from the classroom, even in the what we call the summer or the June-July vacation, we see learning loss when children come back to school. And that's just about 2 months. So could you imagine what happens when students are away from the classroom, even though they're engaged in online learning? It's just simply not the same. So what we've seen in terms of the results at both CXC level as well as the SEA level would be some level of diminishing of results. We've had some students notably performing much better, but that's a small segment as compared to students who would have done worse. So on average, it's not been very large jump or decrease in performance, but you have the outliers where you have some students performing much better, but there are definitely signs of learning loss where you have students who are not performing as well because they would have been away from the classroom for so long.
And that small number you said that did remarkably better is very interesting to me because that also makes me want to think of methodologies and stuff. But we do not live in a perfect world, but the Ministry of Education has been working with the Ministry of Health. So what are some of those mitigation strategies that have been implemented and working in schools?
I think one of the main things that we want to mention is a recommendation that came from our stakeholders. Of course, our stakeholders are our very valuable partners in this effort, and also came from the Ministry of Health, where we instituted in January of 2021 the Education District Health Unit. This is a liaison unit that works with the schools as well as the Ministry of Health. So it's comprised of nurses headed by a doctor, and it's not one nurse per school. What they do is that there are a number of nurses per district, so there are about 3 that we will have per district, and these nurses have been interacting with the schools, and they have been being that liaison. So where if it's a school with a situation, a positive case, or somebody on quarantine, the nurses would have contributed to making the COVID-19 management procedures, which have been shared with all schools and also on social media so that parents are aware. And they are the ones that interact directly with the principals, guiding them through the process and ensuring that if persons go to test through Ministry of Health and health centers and so on, that we can expedite the results, because that's very important for the management of COVID at a school. Because of course, with a country in the throes of a pandemic, there is no way at a school there's not going to be cases. But the point is that we need our principals, our teachers to be very aware of what is to be done and to manage that process carefully. So that's one of the greatest achievements, I think, that we have been able to do in a collaboration with the Ministry of Health to assist our schools in managing, because this is the way that our schools are going to be able to remain open once we can manage those cases carefully. Of course, the ministry has instituted across all of our schools hand washing stations throughout the school, not just at the front, but throughout the school, so that the students come in, they can wash their hands, they can have access to that throughout the day. In addition to that, we have given the schools the thermal scanners, and recently we gave them the freestanding ones so that it's easier for the guard at the gate, because you could imagine when you have students coming in, one guard or 2 guards that has to do this holding the scanners and doing it, it takes less time for them to just walk through and be able to use the freestanding scanner. So that's been provided at the schools as well. In addition to that, the schools have been provided, as I would have mentioned, with the clear management protocols for COVID-19, which is very important. We've supplied cleaners to schools, sanitizers, tissues, and all of that cleaning supplies to be able to boost the schools' supplies, so that we know the schools would have these supplies and would be able to use them to keep the schools clean. Another valuable partner with us has been MTS, who provide the janitorial services as well as security. So a lot of these security guards from MTS are involved in the entry protocols at the gate, and also our health and safety officers, which operate in our government secondary schools. And the janitorial staff, of course, has been very instrumental, critical in this time, and MTS has responded by working with the Ministry of Health to have a health protocol and a cleaning protocol that is increased, especially in high traffic areas. So they clean more than they used to clean, so ensure that throughout the day the classrooms are attended to. So this is very important for our sanitization and for our parents to know that we are taking good care in terms of providing that sanitization at the schools. And where we have cases that a school has to close for sanitization, for example, if a case, a student is discovered, or a staff member or teacher has been on the compound within 72 hours and discovered to be a COVID positive case, in those cases where schools require sanitization, MTS also partners with us to provide a company that will give us that sanitization at the school. So it's a multi-pronged approach with respect to providing the entry protocols, providing the education, the clear COVID management plan, providing the liaison officers in the persons of the nurses and the doctor to give that support to the principals in managing the cases at school. So that kind of sums up our response at the schools.
And we will continue the conversation when we return. I really like the fact that it seems as though there have been some potential silos broken down in terms of the efficiency of information to make sure that mitigation strategies are put in place. But we return to the conversation after this break. We're speaking with the Minister of Education, Dr. Nyan Gadsby-Dolly. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are going in depth on issues surrounding a return or a safe return to school. We're doing so with Minister of Education, Dr. Nyan Gadsby-Dolly. And just before we took the break, Dr. Gadsby-Dolly, you were speaking about the management and guidance that has been happening. And that begs the question about the process for determining those guidelines for return to school to date and for term 3.
That process is one where we would engage our stakeholders. The ministry would put together guidelines that we would want our stakeholders to take a look at and to pronounce upon generally. In some cases, we would go to them and ask, give us your recommendations. In some cases, we would provide a platform for discussion. And so our valued stakeholders, and that of course consists of teachers, that's tutor, the teachers union, as well as principals associations, the denominational boards, and that principal association will deal with our private schools, our secondary schools, our government assisted schools, our government secondary schools, primary schools, special schools. So there's a very wide range of stakeholders. The parent teacher association, they're also part of our stakeholder group. So when we look at it, and when I say denominational boards, the individual boards as well. So when we look at it, we have a very large meeting, and all stakeholders are given the opportunity to comment and to give their perspective, to give their recommendations and comments. This is critical for us, and when we receive those comments, we would work them now into the guideline documents to ensure that what we have would be something that would be compatible with the general view. Certainly there would be individual views that would come forward that may not be able to be accommodated fully. However, all of it adds to the whole, and so that is how we come up with our guidelines. So we meet with our stakeholders tomorrow. We were to meet with tutor today, but they were not able to meet, so we will reschedule that meeting. But all of the perspectives are very important in coming up with that final document which goes forward for implementation.
Right, and you said there would be individual views, which is understandable, and I'm sure one of the individual questions that parents could be asking is, my child need to come out to school every day? Are you in a position to answer that yet?
At this time, the plan is to have all of our students return to the classroom. As you would know, this is our transition time back to the classroom, and so we have been in rotation. There are the advantages and the disadvantages of that, and so we've looked at what's happening around the world, and if you look around the world, our students are back out to school. And yes, that is the original plan, that we have them back out. So it was a gradual return, and so we are at the point now where it's time for students to come back to school. So yes, and I can tell you that after 2 years and then a rotational schedule, it is something to get readjusted to, and that's very critical that our students get readjusted to making that transition back into the classroom. So that's the plan. We're going to be discussing it in a fulsome way with our stakeholders, and then we will make our final recommendations as to how this is actually to be implemented.
Thank you so much for that. Now, I'm sure that there'll be many considerations, and you spoke to some of them and some of the stakeholders that you're doing that with, but there may be a hierarchy of those considerations. What are some of those key considerations for term 3?
Safety would be the priority. We want to ensure that our students are safe, and that whatever arrangements we make, that it would be not putting their safety at risk. So that's in priority. Right after that comes their educational attainment, because the point of school is to ensure that they are learning. And so everything that we do really points to ensuring that our students are prepared to learn, and that they are being offered the best curriculum to be able to do so, that our teachers are well supported. So in looking at the educational achievement, then we have to look at making sure that the teachers have all that they need in terms of if there's additional training that's required for our teachers in any way. The mental support for both our teachers and our children, that is a critical concern. This has been a traumatic time, more so for some than others. And when they come back to the classroom, we need to deal with anxiety, we need to deal with the normal youthful exuberance that might show itself in different ways. We've been noticing some violence in our schools, and some of it can be attributed to this whole issue of dealing with the trauma of coming back to school. So we are also meeting with the Ministry of National Security and Youth Development, as well as Ministry of Gender and Child Affairs and the Community Police. We are meeting to discuss this whole issue of how we best support our students in this time, because there may be some students who require more support than the usual system can afford, and therefore we have to come up with a plan and quickly as to how we deal with that. And the mental trauma is a big thing. So those are the kinds of considerations: the safety, the ability of our students to be prepared to receive the learning, supporting our teachers, putting structures in place to help students who need a bit more support than the system can offer. These are the main things that will be occupying our attention, as well as the digital transformation, which is a big part of how we move forward and how that is achieved as we come back to the physical classroom, because that's one of the things that, it's not yay or nay, it's not physical or digital. It's blended now that they are going back out physically, but we also need to incorporate the learnings and the successes of what we have been able to achieve in the time that they were away from the classroom. So that digital transformation, how we deal with something as simple as attendance register electronically, how we gather student records, how we are able to do examinations and to incorporate the LMS, the school learning management system, into the classroom, how we're able to procure an ebooks platform, which is before us at this point in time. So all of these things are the considerations which will be occupying our full attention as we head back to the classroom.
And I'm really glad that it seems as though it's an all-hands-on-deck approach, because this pandemic has really shown us that one issue can have so many effects and impacts on the way that it ripples outwards. But in the last 2 minutes we have, when are you looking forward to guidelines being ready, and what message do you have specifically to parents?
Okay. Well, the guidelines are already drafted, and so when we discuss with our stakeholders, we will see what additions they have, what recommendations, what changes we have to make, and we'll send that out for their perusal. And so we can expect then within the next 2 weeks, school ends on the 1st of April, I believe. So by that time, we should be able to provide guidelines. I can tell you that our uniform requirements, which we have relaxed for the entire year, those are going to be continued to be relaxed, because we understand that parents may not all be in a position to purchase new uniforms and so on for their children. And as I've been doing my school visits with the education team over the past month or so, we've seen the evidence that has helped parents, students coming out and they just come into school to learn regardless of if they have the entire uniform. So that's a part of it. So by the end of the school term, we should be able to have those guidelines out, having had the input of our valued stakeholders. And my message to parents would be that the Ministry of Education is tasked with providing quality education for all of our children. And though things are not perfect at this point in time, it is a work in progress, and we are working as hard as we can to adjust and adapt to the situation that presents itself. So what I would like to say to our parents is that we are going to do our best to ensure that your child has a safe and quality education in the best way that we can during this pandemic. And all hands, as you say, are on deck to ensure that, so they can have confidence and rest assured that we will leave no stone unturned and we leave no task undone in the effort to provide that quality education for our children.
Minister of Education, Dr. Nyan Gadsby-Dolly, thank you for making the time. We're not looking forward to the traffic, but we're really appreciative of the work that is being done to ensure the safety of everyone going back out where we need to be. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike. Thank you for joining us.